Thank you. Couple things before we get started. My name's Greg. I'm the Director of Horticulture. I've been here since December 1st-ish, somewhere in there. Very familiar with the Raulston. I've spent a lot of time here. I was in Charlotte previous to coming here. The garden I took care of in Charlotte had the biggest collection of Magnolia cultivars in the world. So Magnolias are very near and dear to me. There's also nothing more frustrating in this world than growing Magnolias because they like to bloom as soon as it gets warm and things get whacked back by the weather. So we are definitely victims of that as of late. Initially, this tour was supposed to be early season Magnolias. We're well past that at this point. Things that are late blooming are blooming now. So what we're gonna look at are highlights, things that are looking good right now, a few that might be past their prime, but not quite. So we're gonna take a very circuitous route through the Arboretum. I walk fast. I'll try to slow my roll a little bit so y'all can keep up with me. We'll get to the plant. I'll talk about it. We'll take questions. They'll film me, and then we'll jump to the next one. Does that sound like a plan, everybody? Yeah. Okay, awesome. One thing to mention about our Magnolia collection, we are an arboretum. It's very woody plant centric. Our Magnolia collection is part of a conglomerate of public garden growers of magnolias. We're a multi-site magnolia collection, part of the American Public Garden Association. The Raulston is one of about 15 gardens all across the country that are growing, curating, helping with conservation, and sharing plant material back and forth. So the collection here is one of those. Most people wouldn't know that, one of those kind of behind the scenes things. So without further ado, I'm gonna take off in this direction, and our first stop is just right up here. So the first one, this is Magnolia Lois. Does anybody want to guess what type of magnolia this is? This is one of the yellow flowering ones. The yellow flowering ones typically are mid to late bloomers. So they're way early this year with all the warm weather that we've had. Colleagues at Brooklyn Botanic Garden many years ago did a lot of hybridizing to produce yellow flowers. Our native cucumber magnolia has yellow flowers, so they bred that with some other ones to come up with a wide range of sizes, colors, seasons of bloom. So this is one of the mid-blooming ones. If you've ever heard of butterflies, this is very similar to butterflies. It gets a little bit bigger. I was talking to somebody earlier about the sizes of these. These guys don't read the books everybody writes about them, so they tend to get a little bit bigger than what you might read about. The nice thing about our collection is they've been in the ground for a while, so they're kind of at that mature stage already. So it's nice to kind of see where they're gonna get. So if you're thinking about magnolias, this is a good place to come to see the variety that's out there, but also ultimately how big these might potentially get. Also, they do well in a little bit of shade, but they don't mind sun. A lot of the ones that are fragrant are more fragrant in the sun. A lot of the ones that have bright colors do better with a little bit more sun. And we'll see some of that as we kind of walk along. But I want to keep the descriptions brief because we've got a lot of ground to cover. And if anybody has any questions about this, I'll take those.
When would this look typical year?
The question was, when would this normally be blooming in a typical year? I can safely say at this point of my horticulture career, I've been doing this well over 30 years, there is no normal season anymore. You know, these things bloomed later in the season last year, usually around April, late March. These were just starting to open up last year for me in Charlotte. So these have been blooming since the end of February. So unfortunately, this is the new normal, this unpredictability.
Do they usually start blooming before the red buds, would you say?
Yes, the red buds are early too this year. This is the earliest I've ever seen our native red buds blooming. The Asian ones usually are a little bit before, but it's unbelievable. I was here Sunday, and there's trees that are leafed out today that weren't leafed out Sunday. It's moving that quickly. So unfortunately, it's a horrible answer, but there really is no more normal. We were just in a meeting talking about spring of next year and planning for January to April because spring could start in January. It's just the nature of the beast and the way the climate has definitely changed. Anybody else? No? All right, let's keep on moving. So I have a warm place in my heart for the evergreen magnolias. A lot of these come from Asia. We have our native ones. If you think about sweet bay magnolia, southern Magnolia grandifolia, those are native evergreen ones. This is Magnolia laevifolia. This is an Asian evergreen magnolia, native to China. A lot of work being done with these to come up with different flower sizes, different shapes of the plant. Fragrance is of importance for these. This one is really fragrant. Every once in a while you'll catch it in the breeze. This is a cultivar called Michelle. And I like this one because of kind of that cascade of blooms that goes down the whole stem. Really, really attractive. Almost has kind of an orchid look about it. But more work needs to be done with these to come up with better form because they can look kind of leggy. And some of that is, this is in the shade of these big loblolly pines back here, but in full sun, kind of more rounded, almost shrub-like. I've seen this used as a hedge, which I think is a good idea because you get that evergreen nature, you get that flower, and you get that fragrance all at the same time. But I really, really like a lot of these evergreen ones. Anybody have any questions? The question was, can this be used as an understory? Absolutely. It's a good, like, mixed shade garden plant, and these can be tender in terms of the cold, so they'll be more protected as an understory. You might not get as many flowers. This gets a lot more flowers because it gets that late or that early morning sun until late afternoon. So you might sacrifice flowers for understory, but there's a lot of the evergreens that do well kind of in that understory situation. I've done that a lot in places I've worked. Anybody else? All right, a short walk down to this corner. Another evergreen one, and this is a hybrid amongst a couple of different evergreen ones. You're going to hear me say this is one of my favorites on this trip, but this really is one of my favorites. This is one called Eternal Spring. I'm not sure where this one was developed. Had a really nice one in my former garden that actually came from a plant that they grew here. But the thing I like about this is it starts blooming super early and lasts for a really long time. So this has been blooming since early to mid-February for us here. Nice, big, dewy flowers, really, really nice. They can get damaged by the cold, but they seem to be a little bit more resilient for whatever reason. But the thing I really like about this is it's really, really fragrant. It's kind of past the prime for that right now, but this is a good addition to a garden, I think, because of that standpoint. We had this planted in a garden I worked at right next to a path, so you had to walk by it in the wintertime. And it seemed like every year I would walk through there and couldn't figure out what was that smell was coming from. And it was this plant every time for 13 years. You'd think I would have figured that out by then. But one of my favorites because of that long season of bloom and really good, strong fragrance. Any questions about this one?
Could you repeat the name?
Eternal Spring is the cultivar, and it's a hybrid evergreen magnolia. I've seen this in the trade. I think Camellia Forest carried it at one point. It shouldn't be too terribly hard to find.
When you say that it's long-lasting, is that because the flowers themselves are long-lasting or that it's continually blooming with new ones to refresh it?
It seems like every year it sets a lot of flower buds. So that kind of sets it up to bloom for a long period of time. So that succession of bloom, depending on the weather, this one kind of held its petals closed tight through that cold snap in December, and I was worried this would get burnt, and was pleasantly surprised when it opened up because it is kind of an early bloomer. But it seems like it doesn't do it all at once. They kind of continually go for. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
They bloom for a really long time, which is kind of unusual. Things tend to go full guns and then they kind of disappear.
So, follow up on this later.
The question was, it's a long bloomer, and with the sequence of blooms, you might get some initial cold damage and it might continue to do its thing, very, very much so. I've seen this in the past where it started blooming early, those early buds got nipped by the cold, but it still continued to bloom because it had a lot more kind of in reserve as they're opening up. Yeah, it does have a lot of new buds on it. And it seems like more are opening up all the time. I think this week will be it. It's just about done. It bloomed down low, and up at the top is where the last blooms are left. The one I had in my garden in Charlotte was probably, somebody asked, was this the mature height? The one I had in my garden in Charlotte was probably 15 feet tall, so a little bit taller than that. I'm not sure what they top out at, but in general, kind of a multi-stem shrub as opposed to a multi-stem tree. They're more shrubby than tree-like. And this could also be used as kind of an understory in the shade. I've had this growing in full sun and also in a rhododendron garden as kind of a mid-layer kind of a plant. Anybody else? The question was, when does it bloom and is it an evergreen? Evergreen because it doesn't drop its leaves. It has its leaves on it all year long, so it stays green. And this is an early to mid-spring bloomer. It doesn't bloom in the fall. All right, I think we're going to the white garden. All right, in the theme of this is not early blooming magnolias, the one behind me is typically an early blooming one. And again, I hate to say it, but this is one of my favorites. Yes, we come by it honest. I found out today, and this is part of being new here, this was one of the original plants planted by JC, so this was planted in the 70s. So again, we've got a nice mature selection of magnolias. This kind of gives you a perspective on what they ultimately can do and what direction your plants in the garden might be. This is Magnolia X Lobneri Merrill. Lobneri cultivars are a cross between two different species, Cobus and Stellata. Stellata is the star magnolia we're all familiar with. So when this flowers, it has that star magnolia look to it. Nice white flowers, very early blooming, typically can get hit by the frost. We kind of dodged that, but it's done. It's got a
couple at the top. Way up there.
Good eye.
And over there.
Good eye. Yeah.
So there.
So there.
Yeah.
So you can see at least see what color it looks like. You can at least see what color it looks like. This is well, that's okay. It's not the first time that's happened. So this is a deciduous as opposed to the evergreen. This thing has leafed out in the last couple days, way ahead of where it should be. And this scares me to death because I think we're gonna get another cold snap somewhere down the road. But reasons why there's a lot of cultivars of Lobneri. Merrill is an old standby. It's been around for a long time. I love the shape that these get when they kind of mature. It's kind of a nice rounded shape to it. Always covered with flowers. It's a good shade tree, provides a lot of shade. Nothing to say for fall color. Most deciduous magnolias don't. They turn brown and just fall off. Big fuzzy buds, which are nice in the wintertime, and they typically are fragrant. That's the result of crossing with the Cobus side of that family. But I like the Lobneris. There's a bunch of good cultivars out there. There's one called Wildcat. That's a personal favorite of mine. This is my opportunity to plug the Magnolia Society. If you really like magnolias, that's a good group to be a part of. Wildcat that I mentioned was developed by a longtime board member of the Magnolia Society. But one of my favorites, I like the mature size, I like the globe shape, nice flowers even today, but typically a pretty early bloomer. And this is what we would lead with in a normal spring, whatever that might be. Yes?
Since we have an older last.
Yeah. The question was, is there any kind of succession planning for our Magnolia collection because it's an older collection? So part of why Mark brought me on board is so I can cut down all that stuff and we can start from scratch. Just kidding. But we actually talked about that today, ironically enough, because we do have a lot. It's, plants are like we are. They are geriatric, they get old, they start to have problems, they have bad backs, they have to have knee surgery, all those things that we go through, heart surgery, all that kind of stuff. And we are not immune to that with all of our collections. So it is something that Mark and I have talked about at great length. How do you keep the integrity of what JC would have done? And how do you manage an aging garden? And how do you remove plants without causing a lot of emotion and undue stress on visitors, members, and all that kind of stuff. And it's a slippery slope. Part of being a part of the Magnolia Society, part of being a part of the plant collection network through APGA that I mentioned at the start, we've got colleagues that are growing these things and can share these with us. Someone just asked about Eternal Spring, not being able to find it. That's one that I think we should grow so that we can give it to people so that it's out there. So all those things are constantly being discussed, and being the new guy, those are things that we can kind of introduce as we kind of go along. But I definitely think, there's a magnolia that JC developed that was a cobus that's an upright tree. He gave it to somebody at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania. They named it. It's called Swarthmore Sentinel. This would be a good plant to give to people because it was one that JC developed. So long answer to your very easy question. Those are all parts of the long-term plans of what we're trying to do here on all levels of our plant material through all of our collections. The question was, do we cut off the shoots? We don't. Despite being just 12 acres, we aren't fleshed out staff-wise to go through and do a lot of that. That's also been put on my plate, is to do more with young tree pruning and mature tree pruning also. That helps stave off any stress on the plant. The suckers don't hurt the plant that much. And in a perfect world, it's okay to leave some of that stuff. That leaf tissue of that plant, when it's super hot outside and the plant stops respiring, that part of the plant can still do that. So it's good to leave some of that to a degree. These particular ones and some ones that we'll look at later are more prone to that than others. And we'll look at one near the end of the tour that's gone crazy with that we probably should have pruned years ago, but just didn't have time to get to it. Staying on top of it from a small standpoint is the best way to do that. Yes?
What about water sprouts? Do they hunt the plant?
That's the same thing. The question was water sprouts, do they hurt the plant? Water sprouts, suckers, that's all kind of the same thing. The tree will do that if it's stressed. It also will do that to help supplement itself during really hot summers. Yeah, and some things are more prone to that than others. Anybody else? All right, I think we're going back that way. The main reason I wanted to stop here, not because this is a favorite of mine, we're kind of close to where the bulk of the collection is, and I tried to do a route where we could kind of do a loop back. That one off in the distance is one that I wanted to talk about, but I'm going to save that one for last. We're all about yellows today because they're a mid to late bloomer, but that's where we are right now. This is one called Lois, and compared to Goldfinch. Lois was the one we saw earlier. Lois is much more yellow, brighter, a little bit bigger flower. Goldfinch has a much smaller, kind of tighter flower, closer to butterflies if you're familiar with that one. Butterflies is all through the nursery trade, very easy to find. It's a good one. I started out liking it a lot because it's super bright yellow, but it's almost too yellow for me. And I tend to like the bigger ones that get a little bit bigger. This one stays a little bit smaller in stature compared to the one we first saw. The yellow one that's over there, that one's known to get really big. This is kind of an in-between medium to smaller growing yellow one. So if you're looking for something a little bit smaller in your garden, Goldfinch is one to look for. Again, typically a mid bloomer, but it's almost completely done at this point. A lot of the older flower buds that came out later are what you see now. Again, this thing is leafed out since last Friday. Friday it had hardly, you could see the green haze coming, but not to this extent. Any questions before we head into the collection part of the Magnolias? Yes?
Do we have, keep mentioning butterfly. Do we have butterfly here?
I need to quit talking about it because I don't think we have it.
That's
But it's one of your favorites.
Butterflies is not one of my favorites. It's a good reference one because it is so common. A lot of people think it's the only yellow one, which is maybe why I don't like it, because it's kind of a bully. But it's a really good one because it's super bright yellow. I call it a gateway magnolia because it gets you interested in other magnolias. All right, this probably 2 weeks ago, this was really showing a lot of color. And again, not to beat a dead horse, we're way far ahead of where we should be. The bulk of our magnolia collection is kind of planted in here, goes down that way towards Barrel Road, and then we've got the ones scattered through the garden. So a lot that have been in the ground for a while, again, kind of mature, but lots of things go through my head when I come in here, and some of the questions have been asked kind of in that regard. This is a place where it would be good to do some propagating taking out some of the ones that are too big and replacing them with smaller ones, kind of giving the collection some new life, and giving the opportunity for these things to get big over another big stretch of time. So leaving some of the backdrops of things, but making some hard choices and taking out some of the older ones, reproducing them, but giving us some room to kind of redo this garden. So this is one called Jon Jon. There's a rhododendron hybridizer from England, Gresham. If you've ever heard the term Gresham hybrids, this is one of those hybrids that has the saucer magnolia that we all know in it, so that big cup shaped, and a lot of them will have the blush in the petals, so pink down at the base and fleshing out to white. Sentimental favorite to the Arboretum. When my first visit here was to look at magnolias, and this is where they sent me because this one was in full bloom at that time. So just kind of a nice introduction to this area. Always has nice, good color to it. I had this same one in Charlotte. It always did well for us, but I like this one because it's big, boisterous, has a really big flower show, and you can see it from really far away. Any questions before we wander down? All right, we're gonna go that way, I think. So again, coming down into the core part of the collection, when you're growing these from a collection standpoint, having a lot of them together, it's really important to pay attention to the site. So this particular location is a good location for magnolias because it's in kind of the higher part of the Arboretum. As we go down towards the corner of barrel, we take a big, pretty steep drop down, just literally 20, 30 feet down this way. In the wintertime and early spring, when it's cold, warm, that cold air will settle kind of down in pockets. So all of our magnolias that are down this way are usually the first ones to get hit by the cold, because if you stand here and look, you can see a pretty distinct drop down that way. So the cold's gonna settle down there. Obviously, cold air is heavier than warm air rises. So the warm air rises through the day and comes up into this higher area. So these stay kind of where they should be in terms of bloom. So that's an important consideration when you've got a lot of them. In your own yards, if you've got a big yard, that's also something to think about. Have it someplace a little bit higher or protected, where it's protected by, if it needs protection, a wall or something that's going to reflect heat, that kind of thing. So another one kind of in that yellow spectrum, this is one called Sunray, and it starts out a little more white but kind of fades to yellow. And you can see where the cold has turned these to that traditional brown color of not happy magnolia flowers. Augie Kerr is the breeder of this, and I may be wrong, but I think I'm right. He's a breeder that's from Hendersonville, North Carolina, so has some regional significance to us. He did a lot of hybrids, and this is one of his that does really well for us. You typically see a lot of his in mail order catalogs and places. They're easy to find. Any questions about this one? All right, our next stop is right here, so we're just going to shift over. This is another evergreen magnolia, so it keeps its leaves all year long. This is one that does better in the sun. You can see it's extremely leggy because it's planted in this mature part of the garden where it gets a lot of shade. I had this one at my house in Charlotte, so it's a favorite of mine. This comes from a very well-known magnolia breeder in New Zealand, Mark Jury, still doing a lot of magnolia breeding. He's done a lot of work with the evergreen ones in particular. This is the Magnolia, the Fairy Magnolia series. There's a whole series of them because from an advertising standpoint, we like that kind of a thing. And this particular Fairy series is one called Blush. So if this were in more sun, you can see how pink those buds are. The whole flower will stay like that. Because it's more shaded, they look more white because they're not getting that pigment turning in the sun. So should be more of a blush pink, hence the name Blush. Very, very fragrant. Usually is a mid-season bloomer. It's blooming now because it has been so warm, but this is kind of a tried and true one for that mid-season blooming. So it kind of avoids those cold dips. It usually doesn't get hit back. This is a lot like Eternal Spring, where it has a lot of flower buds on it. So if they get initially damaged, the other ones are going to be okay, and it'll push out a big flush of blooms. But sentimental favorite is in my garden in Charlotte. Nice, dense evergreen, lots of flowers on the periphery, very, very fragrant. Just a nice evergreen magnolia. Any questions before we move on? The question was, will this do better in more sun? Absolutely. It's going to be more dense. It's going to produce better flowers. The flowers will be truer to that blush color in the name. Because this gets, this is in the shade most of the day. Just right now, at this part of the afternoon, this hole, not sure why this was stuck here, but it was. But this will do better with more sun, definitely. Talking about signature plants, talking about ones that have kind of matured and kind of outgrown their place. This is Magnolia Galaxy. This is a U.S. National Arboretum hybrid. They did a lot of work on these in the 70s and 80s. I've taken a million pictures of this one because it frames the necessary very nicely. We're in the process of redoing the necessary. It's going to get a complete facelift inside and out. And part of that facelift is making the entrance a little more easy to get to from an ADA standpoint and just bringing it back into scope. So this guy probably is going to have to be removed. We'll propagate it so that we keep that genetics and have some of the offspring of it, but it's gotten big, it's gotten mature, and we want to give this to be the focal point so that this gives us room to kind of move around and do other things. Also, everything from this part of the property drains right through here. So we're going to address that at some point, right where y'all are standing, all the way down to the corner of Barrel Road. So progress is going to dictate us kind of getting rid of this one. The reason I'm talking about it is I like the flowers. I like how bright it is. It's been blooming for a very long time. This is a true early bloomer, but kind of reached its peak. It's already starting to leaf out. And this is one that has a lot of those water sprouts or suckers. Some people think that's because of stress. I think it's a genetic thing. Some are just more prone to that than others. And you could go through and remove all those, but at this age of the tree, those are doing more help than harm. It's kind of aesthetic to me. It looks like it needs to be pruned, and I want to climb in there with a saw and a pair of Felcos and go to town. I think if this were going to stay around for a long time, we would selectively go through and do that. But that interior foliage really helps that tree when it's super hot in the summertime. That's pretty much standard for all trees. People want to prune all that stuff out, but it does a lot of good to get that through hot summers. That's all I wanted to mention about this, just kind of the progress. Yes?
Say the name.
It's Galaxy. It's a U.S. National Arboretum hybrid. Yes?
About how old is it?
I don't know. Any guesses? Anybody? Volunteers? How old is this? If I had to guess, I would say maybe 20 years old. So everybody's gawking at the peach next to us. I would hate to be a peach grower in North or South Carolina and have to worry about the weather coming up. I hate about that selfishly also because I am absolutely addicted to peaches. So I hope that they don't get damaged this spring. Still kind of in the yellow realm because of our climate. These are typically, this is a mid-season one in most situations in normal spring. This is one called Yellow Fever, and it's a favorite of mine. And I'll tell you why. I like the big flower on it. I like the big oval shape. This is, again, the benefit of having an older collection of plants where things have kind of reached their maturity. You can see how big they're going to get. So I planted 2 of these in Charlotte about 15 feet away from each other. That's going to be a problem down the road, but it's not my problem anymore. So this yellow fever can traditionally get big. I have one burned in my brain from a Magnolia Society meeting in St. Louis, and just kind of fell in love with it at that point because it has such a big flower. Definitely can see the genetics of cucumber magnolia, which is a big mature tree, and also that big flower. This one is starting to reach its prime. The flowers are starting to dry out from the sun. When it first comes out, it's more yellow than you see today, but personal favorite of mine because of that big form. And of the yellows, I really like this one because the flower is much bigger than they traditionally are. Any questions? The question was, are there any other botanical gardens around the United States that have a good collection of magnolias? If you're lucky enough to get to the Bartlett Tree Research Lab in Charlotte, where I used to work, amazing collection. Swarthmore College outside of Philadelphia, one of the best that I can think of. San Francisco Botanic Garden has an amazing collection also, if you're on the West Coast. Hoyt Arboretum.
Brooklyn's pretty good.
Thank you for saying that. Brooklyn is really good because a lot of the yellows were started there. That's well worth going. If you ever get to walk the High Line in New York City, they use a lot of magnolias in some of the plantings there, the big leaf ones, which are my favorite magnolias. The big leaf, Macrophylla ashii with the great big foliage. So there's a lot of magnolias planted on the High Line, very, very kind of a special place. Those are the ones that leap to mind. Missouri Botanic Garden has a decent one. Chicago Botanic Garden has a good one. Atlanta has a good one. Those are the ones that jump to mind. I'll think of 10 more at the end of the day.
What's it take?
What's it take to get into the Bartlett Tree Arboretum? Unfortunately, they're not open to the public because of their very research company driven, and it's just not, they're not staffed to handle people coming and going. Best way to go is we'll probably do a trip next spring to go down there to look at the magnolias in bloom. If you've got a garden club, reaching out to them and trying to get in that way. If you like conifers, the Conifer Society is having their meeting there this year, so there still should be magnolias blooming. That would be one way to get there in the next month or so. I think it's in April. The bulk of the collection will be done, but there's still stuff to see. That's the best way.
Is it about the size of JC here?
The Bartlett's,
Bartlett, yeah.
they're 300 acres. A little bit bigger. We'll end on this one because I'm going to turn into a pumpkin really, really soon. Another evergreen magnolia, so this keeps its leaves all year long. This is Magnolia laevifolia, Gail's favorite. Up until about 10, 15 years ago, this was considered different than a magnolia. It was called Michelia sometimes. You've heard that. They've been lumped into the same thing. Genetically, they're magnolias. There's a whole split between the people that think it's still separate and magnolia-centric, fighting words at some Magnolia Society meetings. But the genetics clearly say that it's in the magnolia realm. Again, I like the evergreen ones because you have that nice backdrop. These make good hedges, and you can see here too that a little bit leggy because it's reaching for this late afternoon light. So it'll do better when it gets more sun, be a little bit more dense. But again, that long cascade of flowers, and you can see all the buds that haven't yet opened up yet. So this is going to be blooming for a while. The laevifolias tend to be fragrant. This one is pretty fragrant. I can smell it. It smells pretty good. The bees like it, which is kind of unusual for magnolia. Most magnolias are pollinated by beetles, but a good garden plant because it provides that evergreen nature, more a multi-stem shrub than a tree, and a really good performer. I'm the kind of person that likes every detail of plants and things that look good winter, spring, summer, fall. So this has these late spring blooms, pretty good season color with the evergreen nature. And the buds, if you see, are kind of fuzzy, kind of coppery colored. There's been a lot of work with this to get more of that color in magnolia buds as well. So kind of a triple threat to me. It kind of checks those boxes for multiple seasons of interest. This is our Asian Valley, so this goes in well. A lot of these come from Asia, but one of my favorite evergreens with that nice big fragrance. Any questions to wrap up? Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
So what are the names for the shapes of the flowers?
I don't think there's anything formal for them. I kind of use that stuff to remember some myself. And I've got a colleague down in Spartanburg, South Carolina, good friend Kevin Paris, who does a lot of breeding of these, and he'll use that shape of the flower for names. He's done some work on some of these, and he's got one called a dozen eggs, because the flowers look like eggs before they open up, and they're really tight. They don't open up like these do. So that's kind of an apt name, but there's like no official, for me, that's something that I use to help me remember some of those.
I mean, like with camellias or
Right.
peonies or anything else, roses, I mean, they have names. Like
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think formally. I think informally, and for some like breeding concerns, I think about that cup shape or saucer shape. A lot of people want to get, because a lot of them will open up and fall apart. There's work that's being done to keep them together longer, so you get more color. Yes, sir.
Speaking of favorite plants, what are your favorite grandifloras?
Oh boy, I don't think we have enough time. Harkening back to my friend in Spartanburg, South Carolina, he's got one called K. Paris that's named after his mama. What's not to love about somebody that names a plant after your mother? That's a special one. Great form, good flowering, can take pruning. There's another one called Hassie, which is a fastigiate one. That's a great southern magnolia. D.D. Blanchard is a good one. It has really dark undersides, backs of the leaf. Teddy Bear, which we have on the other side of McSwain, nice tight one. That's a good one as well. That's enough. Anybody else?
Let's all give Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.